Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Actually, I thought I would take a break tonight from the 9 poisons, 9 medicines, and 9 fruits. I wanted to talk about the qualities that get you what one teacher of mine called a spiritual address. So the qualities that cause you to be taken seriously by wisdom and given certain opportunities. Now, having said that, everybody is being treated the same on one level because everyone is equally being guided by wisdom all the time, whether or not that's recognized. But when we start to do practice, we can be given certain opportunities based on certain qualities that we are demonstrating. This is my own personal experience. I think the word that sums up at least some of those qualities, if not all of them, is fortitude. Fortitude means something like a combination of strength and patience and persistence. So I want to read something that was written about my guru. Okay, this is actually from a really beautiful little book by the photographer Richard Lanois, who took that photograph over there, over the tea urn. And he published a book of his photographs of Ma. And he was a kind of an interesting disciple or devotee. He just sort of trailed around after Ma and took photographs of her and over a period of a couple of years, and they have become some of the most famous photographs of her. When I say Ma, I mean Anandamayi Ma. And he reports in this book, which has some very beautiful accounts of his own experiences with her, some of the most interesting. He says that in all the years he was taking photographs of her, she never looked directly at him other than one single time. So he was constantly photographing her and taking these very close-up portraits too. But he said she always avoided looking him straight in the eye. And then he said the one time that she looked at him in the eye, he said, "I never wanted to experience that ever again." I don't know what he saw, but it was maybe just too much for him, whatever it was. I mean, it's hard to even know what his status was. You know, was he a disciple? I don't know that he received any instruction from her. And yet he wrote some very, very beautiful and insightful things about how she worked with students. So he obviously had some real intuition about how one works with a teacher, even if he wasn't involved in it overtly. Maybe he was involved in it in some subtle way that wasn't apparent. But anyway, this is one of the things he wrote. The word sadhaka means a practitioner. It should not be forgotten that the life of the dedicated sadhaka inevitably entailed the disciplined surmounting of severe hardship. So Ma was famous for treating people in this very sweet, motherly way. Some people, that was all that they got from her. I mean, the masses of people, they received her smiles and her blessing and felt loved by her, and that was kind of that. But then there were people that were actually working very closely with her who saw a different side of her. And she would demand an incredible amount from people, incredible amount of fortitude. There's a famous story about, I think it was written by Didi, her principal female disciple, where she was at the Varanasi ashram, and there was some fellow there who was living at the ashram and doing full-time seva there. And she saw him carrying a tray of food across the courtyard, and then he just sort of slowly sunk to his knees and fell asleep on the courtyard because he was so tired. And some other people, you can tell just by reading Dee Dee's diaries and the diaries of the writings of her principal male disciples, Baiji and some other people, and all different kinds of accounts from people who were actually doing sadhana under her direction, how difficult she made life for them. Right. This is what Lenoy is writing about that. It should not be forgotten that the life of the dedicated sadhaka inevitably entailed the disciplined surmounting of severe hardship and the endurance of profound difficulties, as well as exhilarating moments of sheer joy. Atmananda, another principal disciple of Ma's, who dedicated a great many years to elucidating Mataji's teachings for others, also knew from first-hand experience how it felt to take up the challenge of that teaching and act upon it. Mataji does not often give orders, and probably only to those who by intuition, discrimination, and experience have established in themselves implicit faith in her unfailing wisdom. So that sentence was a little hard to understand, but Mataji does not only give orders, and probably only gives them to those who by intuition, discrimination, and experience have established in themselves implicit faith in her unfailing wisdom. But when she does command, obedience without asking for reasons is the only way. And I have had this personal experience with her personally. I didn't meet her in person, but she came in my dreams, and this happened years ago. She gave me an instruction in a dream, and I didn't follow it, because I wasn't quite sure what she had asked me to do, but I probably just didn't want to do it, so I pretended I wasn't quite sure. Anyway, she came back some months or time later, and she basically yelled at me and said just something like this. She said, "I am Guru, you are a disciple, and your only job is to obey instantly." It was very, very fierce. Yeah. Together with the tasks she sets, Mataji transmits the power to carry it out. But often it is not easy. It is a common experience that to obey Mataji's orders quickens intelligence and develops initiative. It requires great vigilance and concentration. In fact, it is as if ingeniously calculated to draw out to the utmost one's capacity, courage, forbearance, and power of endurance. And this is certainly my experience with her, and I think it's the experience of anybody who's actually a disciple. As well as to bring to the surface one's weaknesses and shortcomings so they may be eradicated. To place one's life in Mataji's hands is to become free, bit by bit, from dependence on people, things, and ideas. So this is what people in this culture generally don't understand. And it's what a lot of teachers don't understand too, and that's why they treat people badly. They don't understand that the purpose of following someone who you feel and have the experience represents and embodies that essence nature, that wisdom of enlightened essence nature, that to follow that is to become free. Because in following that, in order to follow with fortitude, right, with fortitude, you have to, along the way, drop all your karmic baggage. You have to drop all of your conventional ideas about your limitations, what you can and cannot do. For instance, a very common thing is people get sick. And actually some other disciples mentioned here and there how often people were sick around Ma, which was kind of interesting. People get sick and they treat themselves with kid gloves. This is just a fact, right? I mean, we have to take care of ourselves when we're sick, but we really go overboard and coddle ourselves. And this is something that fear of being a little bit under the weather, or the fear of feeling tired, or the fear of being in a little bit of pain, is something, it's baggage, it's karmic baggage. And when you are more in touch with that awakened essence nature, then those aches and pains and small illnesses that we get are just small things happening in a big landscape of wisdom. And we don't have to get so hung up on them. There are people in our culture who literally freak out if they get sick. Like as if it's scary and abnormal and all this kind of stuff. And it's really not. It's just a normal part of human life. Of course, sometimes we do get serious illnesses and we have to stop everything and take care of that. But this is just one kind of example of the kind of fortitude that it takes. You have to do something that you're sure you can't do to find out that you actually can do it, that it's okay. You don't need to be afraid of that, whatever that is. You have a self-definition you have many, many self-definitions that you're living by. I'm this way, I'm not that way. This is what I like, this is what I don't like. This is the kind of person I can be around and I can't be around that kind of person, and blah, blah, blah. The teacher sees all of that and deliberately creates situations or asks you to be in situations where you can find out that all of that is unimportant. And what happens is slowly over time, all of the things you thought were who you are, most of which consist of self-definitions and limitations, all of that eventually falls away. And you're feeling that this little individual blip is in control of everything and has to decide everything and is responsible for everything that happens. All that guilt and fear and shame and frustration and judgment and criticism and all the stuff that just is, roiling through our psyches day and night, all of that stuff gets swept out through the process of this deep, deep, deep letting go and following the promptings of wisdom, which just happen at times for certain people to show up in the form of someone we call a guru. That's not the only form of wisdom. Wisdom's in everything. Wisdom's in every form. But we don't know how to listen to that. Most of us generally have to have some external appearing of wisdom. But then the point is to learn how to follow that wisdom all the time, to be able to hear it, to be able to sense it, to be able to feel it in your own heart, in a whole circumstance, in your teacher. There's people who met Ma, who was, you can call her what you want, but she had to be one of the most enlightened beings that ever was on this earth. Some people just met her and thought she was nobody. That is just how we are. So right now, just take this community as an example. There's people who relate to me as guru, who feel that wisdom between us, between myself and students. There's other people who relate to me just as an ordinary person. There's other people who feel nothing, right? There's always a big range of what's happening. There's some people who can hear and feel and sense the form of relationship that happens when you're in a real disciple relationship with a teacher. There's some people who don't have a clue, and there's everything in between. So we're like that with teachers, and we're also like that with our own wisdom and nature. Some of us can really feel when wisdom is speaking to us. We can feel it internally. It's very strong. Whether we listen to it or not is another question. Some of us can feel in a circumstance or in nature. We can just feel what's right and what's good and what's the thing that we should be doing. And again, whether we follow it or not is another question. But it takes fortitude, strength and patience and perseverance to follow wisdom, whatever form you're experiencing it in, if you're experiencing it. Because as you're following, you're going against a lot of karmic conditioning that you brought with you or you created in this lifetime. And so there's an energy dynamic that's happening. You call it resistance. Resistance, as I've said a zillion times, only happens when you are trying to change the momentum of a situation. If you're not resisting, there's no resistance. So we resistlessly follow our karmas when we are ignorant of how they've got us by the throat and we don't feel uncomfortable with them yet. And what we want to try to do is resistlessly follow wisdom. And that's the whole point of having a teacher and going through all these trials and tribulations. So to place one's life in Mataji's hands is to become free bit by bit from dependence on people, things, and ideas, and particularly your own idea about yourself. To be released from all kinds of fear, such as the fear of insecurity of what people might say, the fear of failure, pain, and death. Anything might be lost, Mataji remains. All of these things are lost, and wisdom is all that remains. And your entire life becomes one feeling of going along with wisdom and listening and responding to that. And there's no other consideration eventually. Ma described it to her principal disciple, Baiji, like this. She said that he was like a flower and she was going to remove all the petals one by one until the only thing left was the central stalk shining like gold. And she said, that will be me. I will be the only thing left. In other words, enlightened wisdom or essence nature will be the only thing left that you're following. You will no longer be following fear and compulsion and distraction and all of that. So following wisdom in the form of a teacher is one way of learning how to follow wisdom in your whole life as a totality eventually. The other things that get you a spiritual address are sincerity. That means that you have a clear feeling about what you're doing and you're dedicated to it. You're not doing it to look good. You're not doing it only to get to pander to it, to somebody, the teacher, or to get recognized by a community or somebody in the community you have a crush on or whatever. You're not doing it to get powerful and just maintain your same old in a spiritual dress. You may have little motives like this mixed in, but sincerity means that you are actually have a clear recognition that you actually want to follow wisdom and you are taking responsibility for that. The other thing which is related to sincerity is modesty. This is a very under-talked about, undervalued virtue in our culture. You hardly hear anyone ever talking about modesty. In fact, I would bet a lot of people just think it's a boring topic. But the more I go along, the less boring it becomes to me. When I recognize how beautiful it is to feel genuine modesty about what you're doing, to not overblow what you're doing, to not feel the need to brag about what you're doing or dress up what you're doing or use what you're doing as some sort of badge of spiritual greatness to yourself or to other people. That you can just be, as Chogyam Trungpa says, a person sitting in a room. Just that. A person sitting in a room paying attention to wisdom. That you don't have to be anything else. Modesty is just incredibly relaxing, especially when you are living in this culture where everyone is being very immodest most of the time out of fear, out of fear of being nothing, out of fear of not achieving, out of fear of not being seen to be achieving anything or being great or going anywhere. So all that immodesty that we experience, most of it is just totally fear-driven. So modesty is just the great relaxer. It's just okay to just be in whatever condition you're in. And you don't have to be great. That's one of the wonderful things about having Ma, for me, to have her be a guru for me. But also I think anybody who feels anything about her, it's a great immeasurable measurer. Yeah. She's the immeasurable measurer. She is immeasurable. You can't measure yourself against her. You might be able to measure yourself against me easily, and come out on top somehow and feel good about that. Or you could measure yourself against anybody else. But when you meet someone who's immeasurable, that's where, for me anyway, my experience was that real modesty began to set in. Any attempts to compare or measure yourself with respect to the infinite wisdom of someone like Ma just completely fall apart. And you realize that whatever spiritual accomplishments you have are minuscule. And that's a very good thing. That's a very good thing, to always feel that, no matter what. So, patience and strength and perseverance and modesty and sincerity, and then courage. It takes courage to follow wisdom because it means letting go of your limitations. We hold on to limitations by and large because they either make us feel good or they protect us from our fear. Whatever you think you can't do, spiritually speaking or as a human being, that's the thing that you're going to be asked to do. Letting go of all your special attachments. Just following when you hear the instruction, just following without thinking. That's what Ma asked me to do. She said, there's no such thing as thinking about it. If you understand my instruction, you just do it. There's no thinking about it. There's no considering. That's what it means. And I'm talking about if you feel you have recognized that embodiment of wisdom that is going to bring you freedom by doing that. Of course, a lot of people don't recognize that because a lot of people go to teachers for the same old karmic energy feed. They're just sucking on the situation, getting their normal karmas fed of being special or being needed or being better than other people or being comforted or whatever the karmic situation is for somebody. There's a lot of teachers who want people to stick around and be with them and give them a certain kind of feedback. And so they're going to be willing to give you the feedback that you want, right? Just to keep the whole thing going. So we do make mistakes, but they're not really mistakes. It's okay. It really doesn't matter because as Ma said, you can go to one situation and if you're just sincere about it, even if it's not a great situation, you can just, if your sincerity will carry you through and eventually you'll finish that situation, you'll complete it, and another one will come. She described this as just a natural spiritual law in a sense. Her metaphor was a cart going to a train. She said, if a cart takes you to the train, don't say bad things about the cart. It got you to the train. Just get on the train. And she said it was an inevitability that when you complete one spiritual path with one spiritual teacher, if you're not enlightened yet, then something else will come along inevitably, she said. So there's not any real problem with all of that. But if you are really following and you understand that you are following to become free of your limitation, then really not much can go wrong. Right? Not much can go wrong. I've had teachers who had limitations and not much could go wrong because I had that understanding of what I was doing. I had that clarity about what I was doing. So we need a lot of courage because we have to do things that are against convention sometimes, that are against conventions that we have internalized, not just ones that other people are putting on us. Conventional ways of thinking about how we should live and how we should relate to people. And those things do get challenged when you're becoming free because many of those things represent unfreedom. If you feel like the whole goal of your life is to find one person to shack up with, which people do, that's the focus. Find one person and shack up with that one person. Otherwise, I'm going to be miserable. Telling you in advance, I'm going to be miserable if I don't get that. That's like a severe limitation, right? I mean, most people aren't that severe about it, but there are people out there who really feel that. And they've already convinced themselves in advance that if they don't get that, that's it. They're going to just be miserable, and then they just are miserable. So that's really a prison. Then we have to let go of those kinds of things, get out of those kinds of prisons, so that we can feel intimate with everybody. That's what enlightenment means. It doesn't mean just being intimate with one person. Or two, if you have a kid. But there's lots of things like that we have internalized. They're not just external things that other people are putting on us, right? What's the proper way to speak? What can be said and what can't be said? Who can I spend time with and who can't I spend time with? What kind of career I have to have and what kind of career I can't have? All those kinds of things that what I need to be happy, what makes me unhappy. Those are all limitations that have to be dumped. And so it takes a lot of courage to do that, not just because it's scary to let go of them, but because it's unconventional. Right? There's a certain level of being unconventional that's required. Right? Even in the context of cultures from which these traditions came, especially for women. There's many stories in the Indian tradition and the Tibetan tradition about women who wanted to be practitioners of some sort and got terrible pushback from their birth families. Didn't want them to do this. In fact, that is even happening in our community. We have a student in our community who's Indian, a young woman. It took her 2 years to convince her parents and then her husband to let her come here to come to a teaching. 2 years of pain and arguing. And she didn't want to become a nun or do anything. She just wanted to come to a teaching. Right? They didn't want her to travel. They don't want her to practice because it takes too much time away from her being a conventional Indian woman. It would be okay if it was like 10 or 15 minutes a day, but they really don't want her to do more than that. It's been extremely difficult for her, and she's been in a very unnourishing situation. And this is the kind of thing that happens, and that we have to have a lot of courage and fortitude in order to get through, in order to have a practice, in order to pursue waking up and becoming more free. But if you are in a working teacher-student relationship in this kind of tradition, direct realization traditions, you will always be asked on many different levels to do things that require fortitude and courage and patience and modesty and deep letting go and a recognition of what is actually happening. A recognition of what is actually happening. And the teacher, me, is simply not going to feed your karmas as much as possible, right? As much as I'm capable of not doing that, I am not going to do that. I am not entering into contracts with any of you to receive your hungry ghost fawnings over me, or false devotion, or false following, or any of that. It just stinks to high heavens, first of all, and I'm just not into it. That's not what I'm here for. So, if you want a spiritual address, this is how to have one. For you, if you want it for you, not to please me or impress me. I'm unimpressible and unpleasable in that way. The only thing that makes me happy, the only thing, is when you all do sincere, real, honest things to help yourself to wake up. That is the only thing I care about. Some of you know that and some of you don't. Some of you are still trying, either out of your own blindness or thinking I'm blind, to have some other kind of relationship with me. And, in that case, I just have a hands-off attitude, because what can I do? Not everybody is walking this path in the same way. And that's as it always will be and as it has to be. Right? But make no mistake that the more seriously you get taken by whomever, wisdom, nature, me, Ma, whomever you encounter in any guise of any teacher, the more seriously you are being taken, the harder it is. It's just the way it is. So if you're trying to avoid being seen by your own wisdom, if you're trying to avoid your own clarity, which lots of people do, or you're trying to avoid my clarity, what are you doing? Nothing. There's a lot of people who say they're confused about something when they're not. Right? Or they don't understand when they do. That's a way of avoiding your own clarity. You generate a feeling of confusion, or you turn your mind off and you turn your heart off so that you can't understand something that you don't really want to understand. People do that all the time. People are doing all sorts of things to avoid clarity. Clarity is the thing that brings joy and a feeling of awe and wonder, but it also is, it's so alive that it scares people. Somebody said about me the other day that I'm a trooper, and it really is true. You all have to be troopers too, though. Right? Don't be so easy on yourselves. You're all hard on yourselves in easy ways. That's another thing people do, is they cultivate these bad feelings about themselves. And then that becomes sort of like a distraction from having to actually take responsibility. There's nothing to feel bad about. There's absolutely nothing to feel bad about. If you feel badly about yourself, you've just been sold a bill of goods. It's just a ruse, it's a trick. You all have the same Vajra nature. You're all God showing up like this. What's there to feel bad about? It's just a big thing, in our culture, that we just feel bad about ourselves, and that gives our lives meaning. Right? That's what we talk about. That's what we worry about. Our problems. How we're not good enough. We're not doing it right. We're not doing it good enough. It's just a big, big, big snow job. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.